can start with your full name, please.
My name now is Thomas Frank Crosby.
And it used to be something different.
Yes, when I was born September 29th of 1933 in the Philippines, I was Frank Thomas Spear, S-P-E-I-R. And I was born in a province, Cagayan de Masamis, Mindanao, Philippine Islands. And to my mother and father, and I can digress a little bit to say that in 1927, my mom, at that time she was 14, was on a cruise ship with her family, and they went to Burma and China and Japan visiting. And when they came back to the Philippines, they fell in love with Manila. And like Lou said, that was considered the pearl of the Orient. It was just like Puerto Rico is here today. It's a commonwealth in those days. So it was, that was before I came along. And my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, my brother, and I were in the Philippines when World War II began in December 7th. But we were all living there. The rest of the family continued on, came back to the States, and just three of them stayed. And then we came along later. Mom worked for the Chamber of Commerce. My grandmother was a nurse at the Naval Base in Cavite, and my aunt had a beauty salon in Manila, and everything was normal. And the reason we were living in Pasay, P-A-S-A-Y, was because it was just the outskirts of Manila, and Grandma would go to Cavite every day to work because it was right close to Cavite, and Mom would just go into town into Manila, and that's where she worked. So it was, and it was very convenient. And then later, I don't remember the date, when Mom met my dad, who was working for General Electric. He came to the Philippines, and that was his new job, to work there. And they met, got married, had me when they were traveling to Mindanao, and and then later, my brother, about a year and a half later, they had him, Patrick, in Manila. And then everything was fine till the war came along. And that was December 7th, and I was 8 years old.
So up until that point, you had a pretty normal childhood.
Oh yeah, we had a beautiful home, and two-story home, and as a matter of fact, it was so nice that when the Japanese took over, they used it as one of their headquarters. But of course, everything was destroyed later.
And you gave me two different names. What's the differentiation between the two?
Okay, and that's a good point to say that, because my father was Spear, and just before the war broke out, he came stateside. He was transferred back. Okay, that was in 44 or 45. No, erase that, way before that. That was like 1939 or 40. And we were expecting to go back and, join him stateside. Well, the war came along. Meanwhile, he didn't know what happened to us. Had no communications. He just thought we were all gone. He started another family stateside. We didn't know that until after the war was over. So Mom, I don't know how they worked out the separation or divorce or whatever. But then she met Crosby, who was a chief in the Navy in Mare Island, which is up by Vallejo. And after we came stateside, that was her first job when she was there. And that's how, when I graduated from high school in '52, that's when I changed the name, because they were always calling me Tommy anyway. So we stuck with that, and it became Thomas Frank Crosby. His name was Harold Crosby. So that's how that came about.
So your parents were still married and together when your father came back stateside?
Yes.
And you, your brother, and your mother were still in the Philippines?
Right.
Pearl Harbor was attacked. The Japanese invaded the Philippines. And your father assumed that you guys had been killed,
Right.
essentially. So do you remember when Pearl Harbor was attacked that day?
Yes.
And how that affected the rest of your life?
Well, it was, at first, it was news, and everybody was excited, and quietly excited, because we were always with military families. And when Pearl was hit, that same afternoon, Philippines was hit. And where we would just walk out to the bay. We were right there. And you could see the planes attacking Cavite, the Japanese. And then, from then on, we had air raid shelters that were, as close by, that we were in almost every day from then on.
So you were still living in your home?
Right,
but
right.
Just taking precautions?
Right. And then that, just before they came to pick us up, they had given us some leaflets, some other information that Mom used, and it said, pack up 3 days worth of food, clothing, bedding, mosquito nets, and we're going to pick you up next day.
And that came from?
That came from the Japanese to us, because just like Lou said, MacArthur had declared Manila an open city the day after Christmas, and that meant the Japanese could come in. They didn't have to fire a shot, and which they did. And then it was just shortly after that that they let us know what we were going to be doing. And we didn't know anything about what was happening. Mom didn't say anything, and we just went along with it, so we didn't have much of a choice. So they took us to the Rizal Stadium where they separated all the military and the civilians. And with the civilians, it was just Americans and Australians, British, all allied nationalities. And then they put us in trucks and took us to the University of Santo Tomas, which was a Catholic university in Manila, and which was built in 1611 with no dormitory facilities. It was just a day school. In a way, that turned out pretty good, because we used all the classroom furniture to burn the food, to heat the food over that time, over that 3 years. We didn't know how long we were going to be there. We had hope that somebody's going to come and pick us up, somebody's going to rescue us. So about 3,000 of us in that. That was January 6th of '42, and I think we started with around 3,000 people, internees, that went in the camp. And the Japanese separated all the women who were in the main building. And they put all the older men in the gymnasium on the floor, on cots. There were probably 500, 600 of them. And then they had a separate building where they had all the women and their children, all the babies and everything. That was a separate one. And then they used the education building, which was a newer building. It was a 3-story building, and they put, at that time, our family wasn't a complete family. So Mom, grandmother, and my aunt were in the main building. They took my brother and I and put us in with all the young men and boys. And that building, the first floor, was all Japanese guards, and the commandant, and half the second floor. And then the other half of the second floor were internees, and then third floor is where we were. Yeah. So it was just like a boys' club, no girls.
So you were
And
separated from your mom.
we were separated. We didn't spend one night in that 37 months with my mom. We had roll calls, always had roll calls, at least twice a day, sometimes not anything scheduled. They suspected somebody was missing and they'd call roll call. So you stood for hours and hours, and they called your name, and you didn't say here, you bowed, and that's how they knew who you were. And but that went on. That was the norm, you know. In between roll calls, we could be together as a family. Mom knew a man who was in the tobacco business, and I don't remember when. It was early in the camp, early, probably 42. They had a prisoner exchange. So when that happened, that's when her friend, he had gotten a shanty for us in the back. I don't know how he worked it, but it ended up to be our place to meet every day between roll calls. It worked out really good. And that was behind the ed building, the education building. So that worked out good. Otherwise, there were a lot of families that didn't have that luxury. Over the years, it grew to about 4,400 internees. And then they had it was just people coming in, especially that last year. And then they took over 1,000 volunteered internees and created another camp, which was Los Banos, which wasn't that far away, but it was a few miles, a few kilometers away.
Now, you mentioned obviously you didn't know how long you would be there for.
Right.
Did your mother tell you guys anything?
Well,
I mean, I know she didn't have any information, but she didn't.
no, and as kids, that was all new for us. I was 8 years old, and we didn't really have an understanding of war, stuff like that. And so it was new, and we still had our I guess children's, we always wanted to do something. We always wanted to be active and play games and do all that, which we could. And over time, they allowed us to. Now, this is a Catholic university, so part of that university they set aside for just the Catholics, for the priests and nuns and stuff like that. That was on one side. And then on the other side, the other extreme side, they had, that was the only dormitory, and they created and it was just outside of camp, but it was real close to the ed building. And they had nuns in there, and that was their quarters. Well, they made that into a small hospital just for the camp. So when the nurses came in, the American nurses from Bataan and Corregidor, they were the only military there. They put them in there, and so one half of it were the nurses, the other half were the nuns, and in between they had a few beds, and that was the hospital. And that's how it went.
And for you, what was daily life like, and how were you treated by the Japanese?
The Japanese left us alone, pretty much. I mean, they had their century. I mean, when we first went in, within the first month, 3 guys, I think they were British, they tried to escape. Japanese found them, brought them back, and then we could hear them it wasn't Hayashi then, one of the other commandants in his office, and you could tell they were beating them up really, really bad. And then when they brought them out, they wanted us, they got as many internees together in the front of the main building, and then they brought them out, and they were a mess. And then they took them out of camp and executed them. And then thank goodness, the Japanese allowed a lot of the businessmen to create an interning committee, and that's what controlled the whole, camp, because we didn't have any. I mean, the Japanese, that was a good thing for them, and under their, watchful eye. So nobody could go anywhere, and that was the first clue when they executed those 3 guys, that's the way it's going to be. You escape, you're on your own, and if we find you, you're gone, you're dead. And so that's the way we started.
And did things progressively deteriorate?
No, not necessarily. The food was the most important part. And they would feed us 3 meals, but it was almost all what you call lugao. Remember lugao? It's basically rice and whatever you can have with it. It's, watered down, but it got worse. Even to the point where the rice, if I remember rice has a husk on it, and later on we were eating it even before it was husked. I mean, we just ate it raw. And whatever we could get. Now, the Japanese encouraged us to grow vegetable gardens, which we did. The problem with that was they have monsoons. That means weeks of nonstop rain, which floods everything. So you start over again every year. Near the end, the 3rd year, as whatever we could grow, it never really matured. We just ate it, roots and everything. And now I started to say that the good part was that the Japanese would allow, it was called the package line, and the amas and people who took care of us would come to the front gate with food and anything. If we needed other things, they would bring it. But everything was subject to the Japanese inspections. Some of it we got, some of it we didn't. And that happened probably the first year and a half. And then until the change of command, so to speak, they were a different kind of Japanese administration that took care of everybody. And then they changed to the hardcore, and those were the like the Nazis, going. It was the Kempeitai, is what they're called, and they restricted everything, and it was just tough. And we could feel it, the difference. You had a certain amount of freedom to do some things, and so they must have known the end is near. We didn't. We had no clue, but we could tell the difference, and because I mean, even as kids, we could feel the difference. And anyway, we had games. We had lots of games, lots of time to do things. We had chores. The chores were sanitation, because it's so hot and humid that we all had something to do, whether it was pulling weeds, carrying water up to the 3rd floor of the main building because they didn't have water pressure. You name it. We had the bugs that we had. Some were our friends and some weren't, like spiders and lizards. Those were your friends because there were insects everywhere. We even had contests on who could catch the most flies, and and then when you have a cockroach or a June bug, where you tie strings on them and fly them and make them fight each other. And we had something to do all the time. Not very much in the way of boredom. Anyway.
And where would you sleep?
We were all in the outbuilding. Now,
do you have beds or cots?
Yeah, those came from the Red Cross, I think, or I think it was almost Red Cross. And the beds were, now the cots, they took care of those for the men, And I think almost all the beds were furnished by the Red Cross, because they didn't have anything like that in the beginning. So I know in my room we had about 20 little guys like my age, around 8 to, well, maybe 7 to 15 or something like that. They had another room down on the next floor down with older kids and with younger men, and but and we had one stairwell on one end that was far away from the main building. The Japanese had their stairwell on the close end, and in the middle were the restrooms. And so every time you left to go, to use the restroom, you had to go towards the middle. Downstairs, and where the Japanese were, that was kind of their restroom and dining room and stuff like that. That's what they used there for. But there's one corridor that ran down the hall, and then all the classrooms, so to speak, were on the one side. And so we had one classroom. I mean, that was ours, and we had excuse me, his name was Leaks, and the other one was like Brother Abrams, and they were our boys club leaders. Took care of us. They put my bed next to the window because I had bad asthma, and they put me near the window because I would keep everybody awake. And when you have asthma, you don't sleep flat, you sleep sitting up. And so that helped me a little bit. And anyway, we all had something. He mentioned dysentery. We all had that. And of course, others had other problems, health problems. But I had athlete's feet. That's when. Am I getting ahead of myself? Okay. Near the end, it was so bad that my grandmother would get us, my brother and I, we had belts, we had shorts, cutoffs like, we had real leather shoes, which she took anything leather and put them in boiling water, and boil it, and we drank it. And that was something that, was good. Or it didn't taste good.
Nutrition.
That was right. And that probably helped. Then she went a step further, and Mom never knew that my grandma was getting my brother and I to steal garbage. When the Japanese were done, they would put them in barrels, and then we'd steal what we could out of it when they weren't looking. That lasted for a while, but she would take the bones and put them under our shanty, and that was where she would hold. It didn't last very long because she'd get them up and then she'd boil out, and that was like weak bouillon, and that worked. So.
This is because the only thing that you guys have been fed for years.
Oh no, but that was. I mean, some people had some food. They had money, and that's the other thing. The Japanese took our money and traded it for their money, which was like nothing, but it was a piece of paper for a piece of paper. But ours was real money. And then so there was Japanese currency and pesos and centavos, and printed real nice and everything, which we used for toilet paper after near the end of the war when anyway.
So were you guys allowed to go outside at all?
No,
you were restricted
never.
to this building.
We were, and as a matter of fact, right after those 3 guys were executed, that's when they took all the barbed wire, made a barbed wire fence about 10 feet inside the regular wall, and then they doubled up on all the sentries, on the outside, and those were normally patrolled, and nobody bothered them. They didn't bother us.
So from your bedroom window, what could you see?
Just the front, really, the front of the, where we were, the entrance to the Santa Tomas is Dewey Boulevard, and then they have a main entrance, and then there's a whole bunch of, it is, I don't want to call it a plantation, but it's like banana trees and stuff like that, all in between. And then when you get to the main building, which is here, there's a road that splits, and then it goes over to the hospital and the ed building right here. So and then as it splits, it goes over here to the gymnasium. So that's all you could see. Anything out here is all you could see.
Did you ever think about escaping?
Did I? No.
You knew right away.
No. I mean, it was the food was probably the worst thing of all of it, because we were hungry all the time. Near the end, we were restricted to 2 meals, and that was, and then they would, every once in a while, they would have some kind of a mush that was from the garden, and by then, by the 3rd year, all the package lines were, you couldn't get anything from the Filipinos anymore. I mean, we were all on our own. And then that's when people were still coming in, and they were still using the same food. And you could know that. Near the end, when all of us were so weak, my brother and I, we had meal tickets, and we'd go get my mom's and my grandmother's and my aunt's food. They were too weak to even get there to get the food. So it was uncomfortable. And we had an earthquake there. We had floods that were 4 feet high. We had a little bit of everything. And remember, I mentioned that we had the hope. Hope was, I guess, the most important in the beginning. Some people didn't have hope, and they kind of just gave up. Well, I think a lot of those, as I've heard other people talk about it, in not having that hope, which is a strength, I think, they gave up, and when they had some kind of a health problem, it took them. And even at one point, I'll even say that we had Sunday school in the beginning of before the war, and I think that's where I got the feeling, a little bit of Christian feeling, because I always had that sub thought in my head, how we always talk to ourselves. Well, that other voice, so to speak, was I would almost believe, even as a kid, I could still remember that it was a positive voice. Maybe it was God, I don't know, but it was something where I didn't feel as alone, which was a good feeling. I'm still preoccupied by being a child, a kid, and doing whatever needs to be done. And but it was just a subconscious thought that was there, and I don't know, that may have been a little strength in putting up with whatever you'd know the difference after the first 2 years, and then as things got worse, and that's when they created the new camp in Los Banos, and that helped a little bit, but they were still bringing people in.
You guys weren't allowed or able to make any communication with your father?
No, we didn't get letters, we didn't get anything. Nobody did.
Did you think about him?
I didn't know anything about him, because in the beginning of before the war, Mom and Dad were like socialites. So the Amas and houseboys, they took care of us. And that was our world until they came home, and then we'd know something, you know, we'd feel that, we'd know that. But it wasn't anything where you really, I never really got to know him. Frank Spear was his name. And then after the end of the war, when we were reunited, Mom put us in a private school for 2 years to get our health and our education back, which it worked, and that was in Hayward, California, a big branch up there. And it was almost like it was a school for special education. One teacher did everything. I mean, we had horses, we had cows, we had to milk the cows, we had, you know, it was good.
So you'd never had a strong bond with your father?
No. Now he came to visit, and well, we were in school, and he'd take us to Monterey or Carmel, and on 2 trips, like 2 weekends, and that was it. Never really knew him, which is sad.
So you and your brother were together
All the
you guys
time.
inseparable?
No,
much?
we were all together, but we were different. Well, I pal around with a little older guys, kids, and he was a little younger. He was only 1.5 years younger, but I mean, we did things together, but for the most part, we did our own thing. And after the war, a lady in one of our reunions said, "I know you. You were one of the red, white, and black gang." And we didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, "But you were also heroes at one point, because when the announcement came over the camp that we weren't showing enough respect for the Japanese because we weren't bowing properly." So when, you know, it's like saluting. You return the salute. With Japanese, you bow and you return the bow. Not for them to us, but for, and so the 3 of us are just a normal day, and we see one of the Japanese approaching us, so we saluted to him. When you salute from the hip. You don't just nod your head. And so he did. We did it again. He did it again. We did it about 6 times. He did it 6 times, and then he wanted out of there. Well, the other adults saw that. They started doing it to all the other Japanese that showed up, you know, wherever they were. Pretty soon, when they saw us first, they got out of the way. They didn't want it. So that announcement was, you know, everybody said, "You know who started that? Those kids." Anyway, that was one of the fun things.
Were there any good memories from
That's one.
aside from that?
Well, there was one, the girls hated us, but the 3 of us would, at dusk, we had pea shooters, bamboo, that were hollowed out, and we would shoot little wads of paper up, and this is at dusk when it was just getting dark, and then pretty soon the whole sky is full of bats, and the bats thought these were insects. Well, they weren't, and pretty soon they start getting closer to the source, and because of, well, whatever, and they know they're not. And then the girls, because they have long hair, they didn't like it because sometimes the bats would get tangled up in their hair. Well, we'd say that, "Hey, the bats don't like it any more than you do. You cover yourself up." Anyway, we did that. That was one of the fun things that we did. They didn't like it, but anyway.
And were you able to bathe? Did you have
Yeah.
facilities as far as showering?
Yeah, we could do that, and but it was like once a week, or, you know, I mean, we didn't do it on a regular basis because they didn't have water, and all the water that we had, excuse me, we boiled. if we wanted, to drink it.
You mentioned earlier that you'd use the furniture to.
Hmm?
I thought you said earlier that you would use the furniture.
Oh,
to
to
heat
heat the food,
Yeah.
yeah. And they did that all through the 3 years. I mean, we couldn't use it for anything. We had school. We would go all the way up to the top of the 3rd floor, which really became a 4th floor, and we'd have to walk upstairs to do all that. And then later on, we weren't strong enough to get up there. But anyway, we had school, the teachers that brought books in. We were only allowed arithmetic and English and social studies. No history, no geography. And we'd be on one book, there'd be 6 or 7 of us. And that was it, that was our education. But we had it, so you started with the water. We had water, it was very trickly, but we did the best we could. I think that, remember, this was, they didn't have dormitory facilities, so the men who came in that had some experience with carpentry and stuff like that, they were allowed to get materials from outside and build showers and things like that. But even then, I mean, remember, there's God, I don't know how many women in one building, in the main building, and they never had enough. There'd be 10 ladies to a shower, and that's the way they live. And it was likewise with us, not as bad because there weren't as many of us, and we didn't have. I remember we didn't have any. We had, and I don't know if we got those, and we got one Red Cross package, and I think we were able to have toothbrush, toothpaste, little things like that, soap. These were all things that were in the Red Cross package, and some food and cigarettes and stuff like that. Japanese took all the other stuff for themselves, because that's when they were hurting.
So, how would you say that you were affected by, before the war broke out, you lived in
We were always taken care of.
luxury,
Yeah.
relatively luxurious life,
Right.
Happy childhood,
Right.
to having all that stripped away from you, and then years down the line, you mentioned that you had to take care of your mother.
Mhm.
So your role was kind of reversed. Your childhood was
It evolved.
right.
Right.
I know it wasn't
And-
immediately, but
Right, and I think we were, because you could see the changes in everybody. Everything was negative. And I mean, you were almost glad to be alive. The food never changed. It was just from never enough. That's the one thing we always remember. And there's a picture of us when I was 11, when we were liberated. I weighed 48 pounds. And everybody in our family and almost everybody in camp lost half their weight. And then if you had other health problems, that just added to it and made it worse. And a lot of people didn't make it. And that was that's the way it was.
so you said initially there was about 3,000 of you there,
right.
and that grew.
Right, to about 4,400.
Do you know how many died while in captivity?
Probably, as I remember some numbers, about 900. It was no, not quite. Because I had a book that showed all the different people, when they died, what they died of, and 2 major things caused the their tests, and that was starvation, which is beriberi, and shelling, and I haven't gotten to that yet. And that's when these guys showed up, and that was probably the worst of everything. So there were about 300 kids in the camp out of all those. Now Santa Tomas was the main camp. Bilibid wasn't part of ours. There was an old and a new. The old was the old one that was there forever, and then they created a new one, I think, for the new internees, for families. Maybe that was part of the spillover from Santa Tomas. And then they had another camp up in Baguio, and they brought all of them down and impacted, our camp. But ours was the main camp, and right in Manila.
And you spent just over 3 years?
37 months.
37.
From January 6th to February 3rd. 3rd is when everybody recognizes our liberation. However, my brother and I and 220 others were held hostage at the very end, so we didn't get liberated until 2 days later. That's another story. You want me to go on?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, then those guys showed up. February 3rd, about 9 o'clock at night. We hear a lot of rumbling, pitch black, and at that particular point, I'm up, and matter of fact, that's another little story, because we would always have to take turns getting hot water from the main building. So we'd have to go through a shanty area to get it and then bring it back in a bucket, and that would be for our Brother Abrams or whoever was taking care of us. And so I just happened to be out when that happened, but you could hear all the excitement. Nobody knew what was going on. And I mean, we didn't have a clue that these were really the Yanks that were coming in. And as it turned out, then I got back and the Japanese were outside of our entry on the far side where the stairwell was. And they wouldn't let anybody out. But when I'd already gone out, so when I came back with hot water, he let me in, chewed me out. But now that I'm in, okay, I take the water, give it to Brother Abrams, and he was so excited he wasn't sure. Now, we had the best view of all. It was all black, but we could hear something. And out you could hear distant explosions and stuff, and we didn't know if the Japanese were doing exercises or what. But then when they broke through, we couldn't go anywhere. Now remember, half the garrison is still in the bottom floor of the Ed building, and we're all, almost all on the third floor. Then they came in, and we didn't know what was going on, but we couldn't do anything. And then the Japanese moved everybody in the second floor up to the third floor, and they joined us. And then First Cav found out that they were in there, and we were in there. So there was a shootout about 10 o'clock. Huh?
Can I add something to this?
Sure.
Quick? When these people were incarcerated, the helmets of the PI,
Oh, yeah.
like the British, they were black. As the months went by, the army changed the style of the helmets in order to be a little bit more full to cover the ears. But these people were not aware of anything for 4 years. So when we were first coming into the city in order to liberate these people, they saw us and they thought we were the Russians.
We didn't know.
What are the Russians?
It looked like
So they
aliens.
saw us on the tanks, because they had no idea that the helmets had changed.
Yeah, everything.
Part of this,
It was exciting.
because we speak in English.
Yeah, it was exciting. So there ended up 220 of us, and somehow some of the mothers had gotten in and didn't get out. So they ended up with us, not a few, just a few. And the Japanese were shooting at the Cav, and Cav was shooting back at them. They didn't know we were even in there until somebody, one of the attorneys, yelled out, "Hey, we're in here!" And so they stopped, and then you could hear from the bullhorn on the tank below, "Move to the back of the room, lay down." And then all hell broke loose again. And I still remember the tracers taking out the ceiling over our head. That was scary, and I was praying, literally. And there was shrapnel everywhere. There was pieces of everything going in every direction. And some, you know, there were casualties. Some were casualties of the attorneys, and one of the Japanese was killed, and some were wounded. But they also had casualties down below. And then that happened for a few minutes. It felt like it was a long time. And but now everything is pitch black except that you see all these tracers, you know. Nothing was lit up except the noise was unbelievable. And so then they yelled that you guys are surrounded, you're not going anywhere. So we'll
Talking to the Japanese.
now that they're talking up at us, and whatever the Japanese interpreted, you know, everything stopped. So they'd say, you know, take a nap, and we'll do all. We'll come back. I mean, not come back, but we'll negotiate or whatever. I forgot what they said, but we'll continue tomorrow. So what they did, the Japanese did with all of our mattresses and pillows and stuff, they barricaded both of the stairwells with all of that because they anticipated they're going to have to fight that. And so when we went to our beds, it was just the raw springs. And so I'm laying on the spring. Remember, you have to have a mosquito net. Well, I'm not on the spring. One of the Japanese guards was going to take his nap, and with his gun and everything, and I'm underneath on the floor, and the mosquito net's about that far off the floor. And so it's just, I mean, when they were laying down, just resting and they were taking turns all the time. I don't think they really got any sleep. But you were always, you know, trying to get rid of the mosquito, and you had this body was like right here, pardon the expression.
So you're sleeping underneath the bed.
I'm underneath the bed,
And
and he's
soldier
right on top. Yep. And then he would be taken. You know, they'd trade. Another guy would get on there. So I think there were probably 2 or 3. Not anything, but you didn't sleep. Nobody slept that I know of. They couldn't. And until the next morning, and then that was the nice part because they brought big, I don't know what you want to call them, but they were full of stew, you know, real good food, which was brought up. I mean, we had to go down and bring it up, and then the Japanese got their fill, and we got our fill, and we all got sick. Oh God, did we get sick? But we kept eating.
That was the first time you.
That was the first real food we ever had for 3 meals. I mean, for 3 years, 37 months, and it was wonderful. Well, sort of. And anyway, they negotiated that day. Now that's the 4th of February, and Hayashi was the commandant, and Brady was the colonel who was on the first cav side, and they had interpreters. Stanley was the interpreter for us. He was up in the 3rd floor with us. Anyway, all during the war, Stanley was always an interpreter. He was always doing things for the internment committee and the Japanese back and forth. And so he was down there with, this is in the 1st floor, and they had Colonel Brady with Anisi, who was Japanese American, and he was the interpreter. And then I saw a picture not too long ago where there were 3 of the Japanese officers standing guard on the bottom floor, not letting anybody go in or out. They didn't have guns or anything, they just had their swords. And so the trade was Yamashita wanted to take his men, there's 65 of them, and get a free escort out to their front lines and let them join the Japanese army in trade for the 220 of us. And it worked. That's probably the only time in wartime history that you'll ever hear that. But it worked. And so when they were gone, the Yanks came in, and that was some saw them down below, because at one point, there's a picture in Life magazine. Midens was the photographer. He had been in camp with his wife, and I don't know why they were separated, but she stayed in, and he got to come back to the States. He joined MacArthur, came back with MacArthur, and took a ton of pictures, for Life magazine. That worked out pretty good. But as we found out later, they came to our rescue because MacArthur heard the orders from Tokyo to kill all of us. It was what they call the kill rule, and leave no witnesses to any of the atrocities, and both military and civilians. We didn't know all that. We kind of had a hint because, okay, the fields that were not occupied by anything they brought all kinds of aircraft material in, wings, engines, gas, whatever, and that's where they kept it, right here in our camp, and they knew they weren't going to get bombed because we were there. So a lot of barrels of fuels they were taking and putting them under stairwells and putting them all over the camp, and we didn't understand that. But now, looking back, that's what they did to the prison camp in what was the name of that? Way down south, where all the other Muslims were. And right now, if you go to Puerto Princesa and look that up, it's a beautiful resort, but they don't know what really happened there. And that's when those 147 men were killed. I just read it. Anyway.
So did you witness any atrocities that
No.
Japanese committed?
No, I saw a lot of people get killed though. I forgot to tell you, I'm not finishing my story, I guess. But after the Japanese left, okay, and we never really knew what happened to them, those 65 men and Hayashi, because they kind of split out. Now, 2 days later, MacArthur comes in the camp and he visits the people he left behind. And then, he was only in there just for a few, an hour or so. And then he left. Right after he left, they started shelling us, our camp, because they knew there were just a few of the first cav in there and what's left of the internees. They were point blank for 4 days, and they killed a lot of people.
And you're still in there?
Yeah, and I'm still in it. Nobody left because they're still fighting all around us. Not just snipers, but the whole Japanese army is still moving, and like he said, the combat was building the building, room to room, and
there's nowhere safe for you guys to go.
no.
Even though you've been liberated.
Right.
You're
Yep. So we're all stuck there.
Still in a war zone.
Yeah, for at least probably 5 days. 4 of the 5 was there. The Japanese trying to finish the job, so to speak, as they were leaving. And so, I'd be visiting with one of the guys, and he's sharing his rations, and then a whole bunch of shots would come in, and you could always hear them. You'd know the difference. And then we'd leave, and then I'd see him, same guy, all bloated, killed on a stretcher. And then, now, at one point, and this was the first day, daytime, and Mom, her building was the main building, but she was in the, okay, the buildings like this, most of the shelling was coming from here, and the Wall City across from the Pasig River. And of course, anything on this side, they got really direct hits. Matter of fact, our pastor got killed in one of those. Matter of fact, the guy who, the Brooks kids, twins, their dad died 1 week before because of starvation. And then when the shelling started, she was in one of the buildings that got hit, and she was killed, just like that. And anyway, that's Curtis Brooks. He's up in Vegas, and we stay in contact every once in a while. Now, where was I before I got carried away with that part?
You said that
Oh, the Japanese were coming back, and MacArthur's gone, and then the artillery, they had set up big artillery right in front of our building, and because of all the grounds there, they were able to put their cannons or artillery up there, and they were shooting back, and the tower on the main building was, like four, I don't know, I'm guessing at about 400 feet high, and they were good spotters. So, and I don't remember any of the shelling that hit up high like that. They were always hitting, I mean, they hit our building, even the Ed building, but we were out of there by then. But they created a medical center, a hospital, a makeshift hospital there because of all the, what was going on. Matter of fact, one of the shells hit in there, and my Dr. Fletcher was our personal physician all through the war, and even before the war, and he was killed in one of those shellings. It was just when you think everything is over.
That's got to be.
I started to say, Mom put us in one room, and it was just dusk and it was dark, and we didn't know it, and she didn't know it, but it was full of bodies. And she said, "Here, you're going to be safe in here." She was, and you stay here, and then we didn't realize, but never forget that smell. They're just bodies, and it's different.
And when did you realize that there were bodies in the room?
When we smelt it. I mean, yeah, and then when our eyes got accustomed to everything, they were almost, on top of each other. They just dragged them in there, whether they were good guys or bad guys. And
you didn't stay in there too
no,
long.
no. We learned quick, but I just always remember that. And but then we wherever, as a matter of fact, I think YouTube. No, is it YouTube that shows a whole bunch of people that over the years they show so many people with videos and they throw them all in there, and one of them was somebody had taken a picture of some of the shelling, and our kids, and I could have been one of them, running. As soon as we hear it, you're looking for a place to hide, and you want to get out of that one little corner, because that's where most of them hit. And but I remember when they showed the picture of the actual hit, and they showed some kids running around, and I could have been one of them. I don't know. So.
And that lasted for about 4 days, you said?
4 days. They had like 3 days. One day was we thought it was over, and then they started up again on the fourth day. But artillery, you know, and now by then the 37th had come out. See, it was a race between 1st Cav and 37th, and but the 37th, they were on foot. These guys were all mechanized, and that's how they got to us first. It was a good thing, 'cause I wouldn't be there if it was a day later, because they were ready, you know, as we found out now, you know, they were getting set to do the same thing. Palawan is the name of that. Yeah, Palawan is the name of that island. It's a long island, and Puerto Princesa is one resort there. And anyway, that's what started everything. So when I'm at the Veterans Museum and I see the statue of a POW wrapped in barbed wire, and they tell the story, they don't tell the rest of the story. They just say, this is what happened. And in 44, that we, you know, lost those 100 men, 147 men. Who's that? Huh?
It is a delivery package.
Oh. Okay.
Front door, front gate.
So it must have been very emotionally draining for you to go on. You spent 3 years as a POW, and then your camp's liberated, but now you can't go anywhere, and now you're under attack again.
Yes.
Did it?
And that was
just
all,
feel
again.
like an everlasting nightmare for you that you
Yes.
never
Absolutely.
get out of it?
We didn't really feel comfortable. We didn't know what was next, because we had gone through the 3 years, and that was like you it was just getting lower and lower and weaker, and we were all so weak that we didn't know what was next. And then all of a sudden joy, and then all of a sudden, no, we're back to square one, a different kind of square one, when you don't know what's going on. And then when that happened, we were scared, because now here's the real thing we never experienced before. So so those 4 days were very different. The starvation part of it, so that is an undulating thing where you have some joys and then you don't. But thank goodness the food was there, and that helped us get our strength back. So we were able to at least cope. But it's a different way of doing things, because one minute you thought everything was going to be over, and then all of a sudden everything is happy. And we as kids, I think we just were observations of all these different things that are happening, because there wasn't anything we could do. And the adults, they probably felt the same way, but they're adults, and I don't know their feelings, but it was different.
So after those 4 days,
Then
shelling stopped.
and then
How much longer did you spend in the camp?
we spent probably almost a month. But the neat part was that one of the supplies that came into camp on one of the ships, one of the guys, my grandmother knew before the war, Mr. Pomeroy, and he said, we're going to go back to the States. Why don't you come back with us? So the Army wrote it up. And so we had orders with another couple that were, I don't know, they were European, but they came back with us, just our family, 5 of us. We were one of the few families, complete families, that survived the whole thing. But it was neat, and it took about the whole month of April. And he described going there, and now we're doing the same trip coming back. And I mean, we bounced around. We crossed the equator twice, and we went to New Guinea. I remember that red soil, the muddy soil, but you can't imagine how many ships were all over the place, you know, that were unloading and, you know, loading up supplies and stuff. That was the main. I didn't see the other islands where they would dock us. They were very, very short. I mean, they were only 1 or 2 days, but we were there for a few days, and but it was fun. We pick up USO performers, and we didn't remember the crew on it was called the Frank H. Evers was the name of the Liberty ship that we were on, and they took pants. I got pictures of it where they made our pants, and because they're all rolled up, they take hemp and made shoes out of us for us, and it was fun.
Did you finally feel like you were safe?
Yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Once we were on the ship, we were fine. Yeah. After that, you know, before that, we didn't know what was going on.
And how long was it before you were able to retain solid food again and normal food?
Right, pretty close to right away. Yeah. Now, one other thing that he mentioned was my highlight, and that's as we were coming into San Francisco. It was a perfect day, and there was the Golden Gate Bridge, and we were coming in underneath it. It was absolutely beautiful. That was May 8th, which happened to be VE Day. So, yeah, that was good. And then they put us up in the Pickwick Hotel, and Mom knew people in Vallejo, and that's how she got her job over there.
So did you have, were you a U.S. citizen?
Yes, because I was born in the Philippines, and it was a Commonwealth. See, it was like Puerto Rico is today. So I didn't have a dual citizenship. I didn't need that. And both my mom and dad were from the States. So, yep.
And you mentioned earlier, you're talking about beriberi, and then also there's one other, you said,
Dysentery.
yeah,
Well,
something about shingles or?
No, I never had that. That was a good thing. They gave us shots for that. Japanese allowed that, and that was very good.
I thought there was one other ailment that you had mentioned that
Oh,
you didn't elaborate on, but you said it was.
oh, that was my feet, because we had to give up our shoes. So now we're on our bare feet
For 3
all the time, and so that's when I probably got the athlete's feet. And then I got to meet some of the nurses because they put me in the hospital, and I didn't really have any that important health issue, but at least they put me in there for a day just to clean me up and fix me up, and then I was back out on the, and it was kind of fun because, you know, these are American nurses. And I didn't know anything about them until after the war. I mean, they were there, and they were the only military. Otherwise, everybody else were civilians. And my grandmother, because she was a nurse in the General Hospital in Manila, they had a shortage of nurses, so they allowed her to go out of camp to do that. She was able to stay out there, and I don't know how long, probably a month or two, until they got caught up. And then I still have the letter from the commandant telling her to get back in the camp. So, if you see the movie The Great Raid, okay.
Ghost Soldier.
Yes, right.
Which I think is,
Yeah, but see the movie, because the movie has one of the women in it who is getting medical supplies and taking them to Cabanatuan undercover, and that could have been my grandma, because she was doing stuff like that. She was at the hospital where the quinine and other, you know, things that were to treat, and they would go through, as I heard later, through the seminary that we couldn't go to, and they would bypass, I mean, they would get through that to get into camp. And so even though at first they were able to get some of the medical supplies, near the end they couldn't. And so, anyway.
So did you, after you arrived in the States and you tried to lead a normal life from there on out, did you suffer from any PTSD? Did you have nightmares about your experiences?
Yes. Matter of fact, I'm still going to PTSD meetings every week at the VA. Every Thursday, tomorrow, for an hour and a half. And but I'm lucky I'm with other guys that were in. They're all veterans, no POWs. And but in sharing our stories off and on, we're able to feel good about. It's like was the smoking one, that kind of a meeting where I forget it.
AA or
AA, that's good enough. Yeah, you know. So you're sharing your story with people who've been there and done it, and they understand. So at one point, and I'm not sure when, in the back of my mind, I could see kids and adults that were in camp that were having health issues, even dying early. And I got to thinking, am I going to get to 20? And I mean, it was a weird feeling because it was, I think, a natural feeling. But I felt like it was different, even though I had been through what I went through, and now I'm free. I should be thinking that, hey, this is neat, something like that. But and then as I thought about it, I thought about people who have handicaps, and sometimes that handicap becomes the strength. And I thought about that, and I think that helped. So I hope that answers it a little bit.
So how would you say that your experiences as a young child, as a prisoner, how did that shape your adult life and who you are today?
Big time. I can use one word: appreciation. Because, and then even more reinforced is watching the society we are today. So much of what we do is not appreciated. I mean, what you have is, from a lot of people, they take it for granted. They don't understand that, I had a loss. You can't put a price on that anymore. So, but it's a base that you can move forward on, and you can see that you'll never go back to that. You hope, you pray, and but I think that's the message I want to leave with the kids: is just appreciate what you have. Appreciate mom and dad, your teachers, anybody who's been there and done that, and in a positive way. It's different coming from me than it is from somebody who's never been there.
Yeah, it's well, that saying, you don't know what you got until it's gone, sort of deal.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's tough for somebody to hear, what you're saying, appreciate
Mm-hmm.
what you have,
Right.
but to really understand and feel
And-
what that means.
And I think that's his message to me. He's been my choreographer, if you want, and that's why I've lived as long as I have, I think, because he wants me to share that, what happened, because it's unique.
Do you feel that speaking about it?
Yes, helps. Yeah, I've always felt that way. My wife, 51 years, She passed away 2 years ago. But she's the one who's my hero because, Julie's, I got so many stories. This one is a good story. So my mom, my wife and I met in Las Vegas. And when I told her to quit her job, move in with my mom, I figured Mom's going to take, get to know her, and I don't have to worry about it and all that. They got together so good, I didn't have a chance. And then, anyway, Mom got to tell her the story of the Philippines. Now she's starting to ask me questions, my Nancy. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to relive that. See, and now we're talking many years later. This is 1964. And, but she did little one-liners, and I'd answer, and then she'd build up on something and build up. So over a period of time, I got comfortable with it, or a little more comfortable. And I think that's what broke the, got me to talk about it. I never really wanted to talk about it. Like a lot of veterans, they go through some bad things and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to remember it. And justifiable. Yeah. So that's those pictures.
So can you talk about your encounter with Mr. Berger and all those years later?
That was well, there's one man, and I haven't told him the real story of one guy who was actually shooting up at us. He was a lieutenant, and he was on a half track, and he was shooting 20 millimeters, no 50s, and he remembers it. But that was a fluke, because when Nancy and I went to Lone Pine at a film festival, this gentleman happened to be there. We didn't know it, but somebody put the pieces together. They knew his story, they knew mine, told him about it. And we got home, we have on the answering machine, Tom, Bert, yes, we were in San Tomas. We didn't get you out, we got in with you. Now, who else is going to know that? And then he said it was the most rewarding day in my life, my whole military career. Then we got to find out, and then we got together and we did things. And he was up in LA, and turned out, and you look him up, you'll be surprised. Bert Kennedy. He was a director, producer, screenwriter of all these Western movies for years, and they still show them on the weekends. And we didn't have any clue. It was fun because I had written a letter, a thank you letter, to his administrator that he never got to see, and I sad about that. And when we went to the Autry Museum during his memorial, the whole auditorium was full of all these actors and people he had worked with for years. And they found out that he was, a veteran. He was going to go to Arlington. Well, they had invited my mom, my Nancy and I, and we sat in the front row. And I still get choked up because at the end of this became part of the eulogy when they read my letter. It was different. And I mean, everybody stood. But he was one of them. Oh, how'd we get to, thanks, off the track here? I get off the track easy. No. Anyway, Tim Smith was a volunteer coordinator for the Veterans Museum, and I had just started working there. This is, good Lord, probably 2005, 6. Wow. And Tim knew my story and knew his story, and that's how we got together. And we've been sharing our stories together. I mean, we went to honor flight together. That was amazing. They invited us to go to the World War II Museum in New Orleans together. Nancy went to that. It was amazing. And then one time after one of the honor flights, we got to go on to one of the radio stations and tell our story together. So, it's a blessing.
What has it meant for you to have him in your life?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I never let him forget it. We go to a gig and he's on a harmonica and nobody says anything. They appreciate his age and all that. Then I tell them what happened. I just give them a short story. He saved us. He and 200 guys rescued our prison camp of 3,800 internees in World War II. And then, people wake up. So no, I'm very proud to be with him. And now, what's cooler is that he met a young lady. Now we've been without our spouses, and now he met a young lady from Thailand, and I hadn't met any ladies. I'm always busy. You can't believe my calendar. But then I met a lady who went to one of our POW story exchanges, and that's how I got to know her. So now we're double dating geezers, you might say. And we do things together now. And it's fun. So I'm telling about you.
Pardon?
I'm telling about you.
I hope it's all good.
No. Anyway, it's fun. It's more fun now.
And is your brother's?
No, he passed away. The sad part of my brother Patrick is that we both went through what we went through, and then when we came home, after my dad, I call him my real dad, my stepdad, Crosby. He was a chief in the Navy, and Korean War came along, and we were supposed to be drafted for 2 years to go to Korea. As it turned out, we both joined the Navy for 4 years. And I ended up in SubPac, which is a submarine tender, my whole 4 years. And I ended up in the same office with my dad for the first 2 years before he got transferred to a destroyer. And he always got seasick. Anyway, he gets seasick on the motor launch going across the bay. And I never knew why, they ever did that to him. But that's how he ended his 20 years. My brother, we joined the service because we wanted to thank the United States for what they did. And he ended up as a SEAL. He went over to the amphib base. In those days it was UDT. And then he ended up on the East Coast. I ended up on the West Coast. But he stayed in for the whole 20 years, and he was in Vietnam. And his billet was in EOD, which is, a SEAL, and over in Vietnam. Well, his job was disarming booby traps behind the enemy lines, which meant that he's going to get, and did, Agent Orange. So he didn't last but 1 year after he got out, after 20 years. That's always been the saddest part, that he ended up like that. I have been blessed completely because I had an occupation with aerospace and the city of Coronado for 25 years. But all that time I was in aquatics. I was coaching a diving team. So all of our kids are like fish. All the sports you can think of in aquatics, they've been in it. And I was in the diving part of it. And we did water shows, we did competition. My 4 years in competition was with the World Masters Games. And so we got to go to a lot of countries and really have some fun. So I have no complaints. It's your fault.
Now, Now, I know you've already given your advice as far as to have appreciation for what you have, but is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
Not really. I just, if somebody can, what I instinctively do now is, and we just did it on the Midway. There's a family. We're in the parking lot, and I can tell by the ages of the kids in the family. And I'll just say, "Come here," and they'll all ring around me, and then I'll share the story when I was your age, etc. And they go, "Whoa." So, anyway, I think it's important, and it's just that little tiny period of time, 37 months, and just to share that little bit with people now, and because half of them don't even know what happened. And there's nothing in the textbooks anymore, hardly anything. So
Well, I agree. I think it's very important.
what you're doing is absolutely important, that, you know, we're sharing and you're sharing our story in your book, and that, like Lou said, I hope you give that to some museums, and because that's, most people, when they read some of the stories in there of what you guys went through,
If we can, I'd like to show you something when it came through that you might be able to use in your book.
Sure.
So when you're ready.
Sure.
yeah, I think we're done. I think, yeah. No,
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
It's an honor. Greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate you doing this very, very much,
You want us to call her?
Zach.